Okay, guys, so we'll be starting in a minute or so. Just just a couple of things that I want to put as ground rules here, right? Um, I'm going to keep this session as open as possible in the sense that I would want more interaction from your end. So I'll try to cater to a lot of questions that you ask me, rather than me bringing in the bulk of what I want to say, right? So if I put in certain points and I have some questions also to work with. I would use those questions to give you some pointers. Feel free to type in any question that you want in the chat window during that time, right? I'll try to cater to all questions, as fast as possible. So the session may go around for approximately an hour and a half, but I would extend it maybe 15, 20 minutes, so approximately 2 hours. So just keep yourself free maybe till 9:15, 9:30, right? And you can always ask me a question, and I would prefer you ask me the question on the normal chat and not give me a separate ping, because I would want everybody else also who has the same question, the answer to be resolved with it. Okay, so just make sure you type in the chat window. When I'm explaining a question, just one small request. When I'm explaining something and explaining a question, just wait for me to complete, and then you can clearly type in your question in the chat window. Okay, and I'll give you some time post every discussion that I have with you, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to put in your questions, and I'll cater to everything. All right. So, like I said, right now, this session is very, very specific to people who are in the last leg of their preparation. Okay, and the reason why I decided to have this session is because I mean, this is peak season, right? Everybody's looking at round two. Everybody's looking at taking up the test by, say, December mid. Some people would have the exams by November. So what do you do in your last leg of preparation? What kind of material do you use? What are the different pointers you need to understand to maximize your score? How do you analyze your practice tests? What do you do for the AWA and the IR sections? So I'm going to cater to all of those questions, right? If you're a person who's just starting off your entire preparation on Gmat, then I don't think this entire session would make sense for you, right? So you may find things that I'm bringing in certain questions, I'm giving certain pointers. You may not understand certain things because you've not done your initial bit of prep. So I would suggest then you know log off, you continue your practice as you were doing before, and then you can look at the recording of this session once the session is uploaded on YouTube. All right, so remember, just a small pointer attached here, this session is meant for people who are in the last leg of their preparation. All right, okay, so before we start, right, I'm going to share my screen in a while. I have a PPT here, but I'm going to also have a writing pad so that I can write things also and show it to you, so that it helps me interact with you a little better. uh, what is it that you are looking for? And I want all of you all to at least type in something in the chat window. Okay, what is it that you are looking for as a takeaway from this session? So if you can give me an answer to that, I'll try to uh, entirely rephrase my lecture. Okay, how to maximize your score. All right, what else, what are you looking at specifically? Okay, strategies to maximize score, IR and AWA. Okay, timing management, quick last minute guide and how not to panic. All right, stress management, do's and don'ts on exam day. Okay, how to cope with time pressure, how to improve weak areas. Okay, okay, all right, how much to study in the last week? All right, okay, got it. Fine. So most of your okay, so since duration is reduced, how do we get through and manage it? All right, so duration is reduced. That's actually a good thing, Hasya, right? I wouldn't look at it as a negative. I would say it's more of a positive. But I'll cater to that, right? I'll say how many marks do you give in last 3 weeks? Okay, I'll speak about that. Perfect. So what I'll do, right? What I'll do, since most of y'all are in that time frame of having a test in say a couple of weeks time or 3 weeks time or 4 weeks time, right? Some of y'all I see who have logged in have the exam maybe in a week's time or so. I mean, those who I have interacted. I think a couple of y'all may have it tomorrow or day after. But let's see. Let's see. Okay, I'll try to cater to everybody and. Most of your problems here are based on time management and what do you do on RC, what do you do on what do you do to manage stress, okay, what do you do to avoid certain traps, tips to get a 700 plus. Okay, so just one thing, right, just one thing before we start. um, See, the most important thing is for you to understand that your practice test scores are clear indicators of what you're going to get. Okay. uh, many students come to me and they say, I've got a practice test score of 710, but I ended up getting a 680 on the Gmat. Why did I get a 30-point decrease? The reason why you get a 30-point decrease is because the questions on the test are way more dynamic than what you have on the practice test, right? The practice test questions are questions which were retired almost 3 to 4 to 5 years back, right? So whenever you're analyzing your test, and I'll go a little in depth towards the end. Always make sure that you take into consideration a standard deviation of minus 20 to minus 30 points of what you got on your last test. Okay, so if you're targeting something like a 700, you need to at least score a 720 on your practice test for you to at least be there and thereabouts for a 700. Okay. Like I said, I'm not going to specifically speak about how to score a 700, right? I'm going to speak about how to maximize your score, right? If you're at a 640, how do you push it to a 670, right? If you're at a 670, 680, how do you push it to a 700, right? So a couple of pointers before, and I'm going to write things on my uh, whiteboard here. I'm going to share my screen with you. So once you're able to see a whiteboard here, you can quickly type in the chat window if you're able to see it, and I can continue from here. Okay. So I'll cater to perfect. So I'll cater to the easy questions first, right? Get this done and dusted because I don't think this is too much of an issue. What do you do for the AWA and the IR sections? I'll cater to this first because it's a very minor, topic and a minor issue of sorts, right? Now, what I would recommend, and I've already spoken to some of the students also based on this, whenever you work with the AWA section, right, the first thing you would do is to design a template. Okay, you design a template of your own. What do I mean by a template? A template basically has what you're going to put in the introduction, how many body paragraphs you're going to have, how many examples are you going to introduce in each of the body paragraphs, and how are you going to conclude your entire essay. Correct? So the introduction and the conclusion, right? What happens when you have a template? It helps you pre-plan your essay. So what happens? So all you have to do on test day is to fill in the specific variables unique to the prompt that you get. Got it? So what you'll have to do is only fill in the data that is required for the body of the entire essay and not for the intro and the conclusion. You can create an intro and you can create a conclusion out of it. There are two things you can use. We give you a template, right? We have a CV template and we have an AWA video that you can all, make use of. Just go through the video. It's approximately 40 minutes long. We take a sample essay also and we break down the essay. Or my personal suggestion is for you all to go on to Gmat Club and download this format of an AWA essay. Okay, it's called Chinese Burned, right? It's a very good format. I've used it for my prep when I was prepping for the Gmat. It really helped me out. Gives you a structure to work with, and it will basically, the good thing about creating this template is you'll have to only spend time on the body paragraphs, which reduces your time, right? You don't need to worry about the intro and the conclusion too much, right? That is the first thing that I would recommend. Okay. The second thing that I would recommend whenever you work with an AWA and essay, spend 5 minutes. You have 30 minutes, right? I would split this 30 minutes into the first 5 minutes. Spend time to plan out and outline your essay. Plan and outline your essay. Right? What do I mean by this? I'm just basically asking you to create a straw man. Now, what is a straw man? A straw man is basically a dump of all the important points that have come to your head for you to draft this entire essay. Right? You normally when you think about a topic, you're going to get random points in your head that pop up. Jot down all those random points quickly. Right, in the 5 minutes that you have. Basically, I'm asking you to spend 5 minutes to think about everything and jot down all the points that come to your head. Then the next 5 minutes needs to be used to structure all of these thoughts that you've brought in, right? You already have an initial structure in place. You have the intro, you have the conclusion. The body paragraph requires a structure, right? So what points are you going to put in first? What examples are you going to give to say reinforce the points that you're going to make, right? Create a structure in your essay. That's another 5 minutes. You take 15 minutes to type out the entire essay and leave 5 minutes towards the end to have a good read through, right? Read through the entire essay once so that you can pick up on certain grammatical errors that you've made, maybe certain point changes you want to do, right? You can do that in the last 5 minutes. This is how I would normally split up this essay. And you know that, I mean, there's no specific preparation that you would do for an AWA, because all the AWA are basically a CR questions, like a CR question. You have an argument, you have to break down the argument, right? What I would do if I were you at this point, right? When I'm taking a practice test, I would take up the AWA section 2 after I finish the quant and verbal sections. And I would draft the entire essay on a Word file, right? And you can always send us the AWA to prep@crackverbal, right? You can always send this to prep@crackverbal. One of us would definitely review the essay and give you a score out of 6. Got it? And we'll obviously give you some advice on what needs to be changed, how you can tweak your essay slightly to get the maximum possible score, right? Just keep in mind one thing, that please do not overlook the AWA section, because it's very, very important in the application process. You can't afford an AWA score of anything less than 4, okay? Anything less than 4 is looked upon, with big question mark, because then if you have a lower AWA score and you apply with an immaculate essay, then they know something is wrong. And remember, the colleges will have access to your actual essay that you've written. Okay, the AWA that you write on test day, the college will have access to read the entire essay. So just make sure that in your last 2 weeks, so the last week of your prep, you at least, when you're taking a practice test, right, you have around 6 official practice tests that you can take up. There should be around 4 to 5 topics there. Take those topics and draft the essays based on those. Got this? So that's a very quick fix on the IR section. I mean, on the AWA section. Any questions on this, guys? Any questions on AWA that you're facing that you want me to manage? I just gave you a template that I feel would be the best when you work out, and that's Chinese burn. I would also endorse the CV template that we have, right? So these two should take care of things. I'll speak about registration and so on, right? When do you have to register? I'll give you like a format. Okay, I will start with a timeline. So what I have in my mind is I have a timeline. What does a student with 1 month to go, right, need to do? 1 month to deadlines, right? 3 weeks to deadlines, 2 weeks to deadlines. I'll give you like a basic breakdown of those. Any questions on the AWA section, guys? We'll wrap this up because that's the easy bit of the entire webinar. And then, okay. So how long should the essay be? See, there's no specific word limit. Okay, so you don't need to worry about the length of an essay. What I would recommend personally is for you to have an introduction, 3 body paragraphs where I would at least put in 1 point or 2 points in each of the body paragraphs, and then a conclusion. Okay, so I would say I wouldn't keep lesser than 1 body paragraph. Lesser than 2 body paragraphs, and I wouldn't keep more than 3 body paragraphs. Okay. Remember, the more you write, the more the chance of making grammatical errors. The more you write, uh, the points that you're going to get on how you structure your essay, right, and how you represent things in a very crunched manner, that you're going to lose out on, right? So at least maximum keep it as 4 to 5 paragraphs is what I would recommend. See, Anjali, the only way you can be confident of registering for your exam, right, is based on your practice test. If you take up a practice test and your score is approximately close to what you are, aspiring to get, right, then definitely that's a go ahead for you to go and book the test date. Right? That's the only answer I have. So if you ask me a question, when do I register for the exam? I can't make that decision for you, right? If you ask me when do I get confident of registering for the exam, then there's one simple question for it. Take a practice test and then figure out what your score is. And if your score is pretty, say if you're looking at a 720 and your score is a 680, I think you're right there, right? I would at least plan it 3 weeks or 4 weeks from the time I took the practice test and got a 680, right? If you're looking at a 720 and you've got a 620, right, then it doesn't make sense for you to plan your test date in a couple of weeks or 3 weeks time. Got it? Prithvi, one answer for you there. I don't think so. Okay, you have a 700. I would apply if I were you. Okay, you have a work ex of 10 years. That's going to hold you in good stead. So spend that time instead of taking the test again. Spend that time on applications, please. What are you in double mind, Smith? Can you elaborate on that, please? See, everybody would have that question in their mind, Smith. Am I prepared enough? Okay. Um, See, there's two ways to look at it. Okay, there's two ways to look at it. Now, what do you mean by prepared enough? What do you mean by prepared enough? Are you saying that I want to work out 1,000 quant problems and I want to get like 950 of them right? Or when you say I'm prepared, am I confident enough to go ahead with the test, saying that I'm going to do that, right? I don't think it's something to do with preparation. It's something to do more with confidence. Okay, and that's where the practice test comes into play. If you take up a practice test, right? Uh, it, some people look at it as that it's going to bring your confidence down. I don't look at it as that. I look at it as a checkpoint of sorts from where I can plan out what I need to do further. Okay, so if you get a practice test score of a 660, believe me, you've already prepared all the concepts, everything is in place. You just need to practice a little bit more, right? Pick out what exact problem areas you have on each of the topics of quant and verbal, and work with that separately. If you get a 710 and a 720 on the test, you are prepared enough. You don't need to worry about things. You need to worry about a test taking strategy. How do I maximize the score? How do I get that 20 points extra? And that I'll deal with in today's session. Okay. So if you're asking me, am I prepared enough? Then again, you're the only person who can answer that. Am I confident enough to go and give up the test? Then that's another question altogether. Hmm. Yeah, Saurabh. So if you're looking at a 740, right, like I said, unless I get to a 750 or a 760 on the practice test, I would still, be a little apprehensive of picking a test date. Okay. So you need to understand that, see, if you're looking at a 720 or a 730, right, and you get a 710, I don't think that's too much of a difference, right? A person who gets a 720 and a person who gets a 730 or 740 is looked upon the same way by B schools, but a person who gets a 710 and a 750, right, now that's a marked difference between the two scores. So if your target score is around a 720, 730, 740, and you end up getting a 720 or a 710, right, then I don't think you need to spend your efforts on preparing for the test for another 20 points. Because what my experience tells me, I mean, with dealing with a lot of students, is if even if you go for the retake, right, for another 20 points, what happens is you start working on the problem areas. Say you realize that you messed up quant, right? You got a 48 on quant. Now you try working towards the 50. But then what happens? You get to a 50 on quant, but your verbal score drops by 1 or 2 points, and you end up at the same point, right? So it's just just wasting the time and effort on taking up a retake, unless you're targeting for something like a 740 or a 750. If you ended up with a 710, right? I wouldn't recommend a retake for that for such a student. I would recommend a retake only for a student looking for a 40 or a 50 point increase. If you're looking at a 20, 10, 20, 30 point increase, then my advice to you is to always go with the score that you have. Right? Yes, Saurabh, your range is from 710 to 740. I would if I get anything in that range, right? 720, 730, I would accept the score. I wouldn't think about anything else. Simplicity trumps florid language, Akshay. Don't worry about the language. They only test you on 3-4 things. One is how you structured your thought process. What are the points that you make, whether they are hard hitting or not, and whether you made grammatical errors or not. Okay, they're not going to look at you using fancy words, fancy language. It's very easy to score a 6 on the AWA. You don't need to use words like hortatory. You don't need to use like condolences and all of that, right? You don't need to use such words in an essay. You just need to use simple language. Right. Perfect. So, all right. Okay. So somebody asked me how you access the CV template, guys. It's there in your study plan. So you have a study plan with an Excel sheet. So look at the link section of the Excel sheet. You will have a link to an IR video and the AWA video. Okay. So for the IR section, going to the IR section now, what I want you guys to do is this. Okay. There's just two, 3 things again that I would recommend. There's a video that is shot by me for the entire IR section. It's a 45-minute IR video, which is again the link to which is in your study plan. If not, you can go to the CV YouTube channel and you can have a look at the IR video. What I would want you all to do for the IR section, right, is this. You need to be very, very, you need to get familiar. You need to get familiar with graphs. Okay, this is the extra bit you'll have to do. Everything else in the IR section, right? Everything else you've already dealt with in terms of critical reasoning, reading comprehension, and statistics on quant. Okay, the only thing that you'll have to do some extra work is to get familiar with graphs. And in this IR video, right, I actually speak about the different types of graphs and how you need to approach those graphs. Right, the graphs that you need to get familiar with. Most of y'all will be familiar with these anyway: pie charts, bar graphs, line graphs, right? These you would normally be familiar with. But the other graphs that normally come on the Gmat are bubble charts, right? It's better for you to get familiar on bubble charts and also scatter plots, right? Sometimes you end up getting scatter plots. You end up getting maybe a graph with 1 x-axis and 2 y-axis. So you'll need to know how to work with those graphs, right? As if you're exposed to different types of graphs, it'll be easier for you to comprehend the graph come test day, and it will not be a surprise to you on test day. Okay, so just get familiar with these graphs, how to read those graphs, how to analyze those graphs, what to do with the units on the x-axis and the y-axis, and so on. Right? That's very, very important. And this video deals with the 4 types of, it deals with the different types of graphs with an example for each. Right? And just make sure you get familiar with the graphs. The third point is get familiar with the question types. Right? Get familiar with the question types. There are 4 question types on the IR section. You need to get familiar on how you need to answer, right? How you need to pick your answer from the answer choices, and what things you have to be careful about, right? Remember, in the IR section, you have absolutely no partial credit, right? So in one question, you may have to pick, 3 answer choices, right? Once you have a look at the IR section, you'll understand what I mean. And only if you get all 3 answer choices right, would you be awarded a point for that question. Okay, so you have to be very, very, very careful. See, what I look at, how I look at the IR section, right, is I always look at it as a mini case study. I look at this as always a mini case study. You're given huge pieces of information. Okay, most of it is irrelevant. Most of it will be just, fancy language being used to explain something. But what you will have to do is you will have to find that critical piece of information that helps you answer the question. So what you need to understand when you work with the IR section is you don't try to use every piece of information you need to, to work, right? What you do out of that pieces of information, you sift through what is important and what is not. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, right? If you're able to find that, critical piece of information that answers the question, things become a little easier, right? So just make sure you get familiar with the question types and you understand how to work with a case study, right? With a case study, you need to look at all the facts and hold on to what is necessary, right? So these are the two things that I would recommend. And third thing, the most important I would say out of all the points that I made here is never skip the IR section on the practice text, right? That is the best resource. This is the best resource, okay, for IR questions, because they are official IR questions, right? Never skip the IR section, please. You have 6 tests. You have 12 into 6, 12 into almost 4, which is 48. 4. There are only 4 IR questions in the first test has only 1 section. The remaining 4 paid tests have 4. So there's approximately 48 to 60 IR questions in the entire practice set. So make sure you work with those 48 to 60 questions, okay? If you want extra help on the IR section, then you're going to find an entire IR, tool, IR prep tool on the nba.com website. Okay, you need to purchase this though, so you're free to do that. My personal suggestion would be if you're okay to use the practice test IR questions, that should be good enough for you to get prepared for this entire section. Okay, it's just that you need to do the extra bit of work to get familiar with the pie charts, bar graphs, line graphs, bubble plots, bubble charts, and scatter plots. All right. Any question on the IR section? Gaurav, how do you keep yourself calm on the test? That's a very. I mean, I will not be able to answer that, right? I mean, it's different for different people, right? I mean, I can't I can't I can't give you gyan saying that you have to keep your you have to do yoga, or you have to sleep really well before the test. It depends on how you look at it. But I'll give you one piece of advice, okay? And this is for everybody out there. The reason why you feel that you need to keep calm on the test is because you yourself start thinking about what score will I get, and you put yourself under that immense pressure of performance pressure. See, the best thing to do, and trust me when I say this, the best thing to do is and this is where the practice tests help. That you're getting something like a 710, 720, 730 on the practice test, right? Or whatever score you're getting on the practice test, that is what you're getting, right? Your score is going to be in and around the same marks that you've got on your practice test. So when you go on test day, right, it's always better to just let go of everything and you say, okay, I know I have the potential to get this much. I just have to take each question as they come, right? And you take each question as they come. Just work with the first, then go to the second, then go to the third, then go to the fourth. You'll realize if you take questions one by one, and don't think about what will come on the verbal section, what will come as the next question. You don't critically analyze that too much. Things will go pretty well, right? You will know how to let go of things. You will know how to basically how to strategize your time. Everything will fall into place. But if you start panicking, right, and this is a pattern that I've seen from a lot of students. They take the quant section first, and suddenly the first question throws at you a question which you're not able to comprehend, right? And then they start working, and they just start working through it. 3 minutes, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 minutes, and then finally they let go. And once they let go, right, it starts affecting their mindset of the next questions, right? The first question itself created that problem. See, one thing, and I want to clear this issue out, with all of you all who are logged into this webinar. If anybody tells you that the first 10 questions are the most important, that is absolutely false. Yes, the first 10 questions are important, but they do not determine what score you're going to get. It's your performance over the entire quant section and the entire verbal section that will determine your score. Why are the first 10 questions important? The first 10 questions are important because the fluctuation or the varying degrees of difficulties of the questions will be a little more in the first 10 than when compared to the next 10 and the next 10 and the next 10 and so on, right? So for one test taker, for say test taker A, the test might start, the first question on the quant section might start at 540. The first question might be at a 540 level. But for test taker B, the first question might be at a 700 level, because the algorithm, right, the computer does not know what level you are at in the beginning of the test. Only as you proceed, right, answering the questions 10, 20, 10, 15 questions, it gets data on how you've answered all the previous ones. That's when it starts adapting the questions based on your performance. So don't get under pressure, right, when you work out the first when you work on the first question and you don't get it, it's okay to let it go. You can always recover, right, towards the end of your test. To get it, and I'll show that to you when I go to the slide. To get a 51 on quant, right, you can afford 3 errors, right? You can afford 3 errors. Even if you get 4 errors, you get a 50, right? So how you make your errors? See, you shouldn't hesitate to let a question go. Okay, so if you're getting caught up on the first, you're not able to think, let it go, take a deep breath, work your way through the second. Don't let the first question affect you. Okay, now what IR score is good enough? Any IR score from 5 onwards till 8 is absolutely fine. Anything which is lesser than 5 is not recommended. Okay. Aparna, it's better for you to look at what the 4 question types are. Like I said, the video should mention it. I'm not going to keep this session, on a discussion on IR. I'm going to deal with other things also, right? There are 4 question types. One is the graphical interpretation. The other one is a two-part analysis. The other one is a table analysis, and the last one is called a multi-source reasoning, right? So those question types, along with an example of each, is explained in the video. So it's better for you to go through that. Kanak, see, again, you're asking me very, questions that I will not be able to answer, right? How much can you improve by studying 5 hours a day productively for 30 days from a beginner's point of view? That depends on where you start, right? So if you started at a 400 level, studying 5 hours a day proactively for 30 days is not recommended, right? But if you've started at something like a 620 or a 640 in your practice test, right? Studying 3 hours or 4 hours a day for the next 30 days is absolutely fine, right? You need to understand this. You need to understand this, that if you get anything less than a 500 on a practice test, right? There are certain issues with your understanding of fundamentals. So you'll have to spend the first 30 days on the fundamentals and then go on to actual prep. Okay, so in that case, we would recommend 2.5 months of prep. Sunmeet, if you don't have the study plan, just send an email to prep. Okay, so we can attach it and send it to you. Okay. Kamakshi, I didn't understand your question. If you're unable to answer, then I didn't get your question. So can you elaborate a little, please? Santosh, 3 questions are experimental. 3 questions are experimental in the IR section. So ideally, you can afford around 4 errors or 5 errors out of the 12 if you want to get something like a 5 or 6 or 7. Okay. Normally, once you go through the question types, you'll realize that there's something called multi-source reasoning. That question type is the problem because it takes you a long time to solve. Okay, and you're going to be running against time. You're always running against the clock in the IR section. So you have to be a little careful there. So if you're letting go of one entire MSR, one entire multi-source reasoning question will have 3 questions under it. Okay. So if you're letting go of one entire multi-source reasoning question, then, and you have 3 experimental questions, and the maximum you can score is 5, right? That basically entails that you get everything else right. If you are unable to answer few questions and you're confused, then you have to let it go. Simple as that. Okay. on exam day, if you're unable to answer certain questions, you have to let it go. If you're unable to answer questions towards the end, then you've not managed your time well. You need to manage time better, because one thing you need to understand, that you're going to be penalized more for leaving questions unanswered than for getting questions wrong. Yes, what I mean is an educated guess. Okay, I don't mean to just pick blindly one out of five and move on. There would definitely be ways to eliminate answer choices. It's the same as verbal on quant. Okay, I mean on quant, things are a little more black and white. But even on quant, right, you can actually eliminate answer choices which are illogical. What I meant is always make an educated guess. Yes. Shweta, yes, I would definitely recommend you purchase the 2 practice tests from the MB.com website. Okay. So I think last week is only meant was only meant for practice. So I'll elaborate a little more once I go into my slides. No, Manu. IR questions have no. There's no difficulty levels at all. All IR questions are non-computer adaptive. Okay, they're not adaptive at all. Okay, there's no partial credit, but they are not adaptive. Anish, when you say on the verbal section, how many questions can I afford to get wrong? That depends on what score you're looking at, right? If you leave one question of each type from IR, you still get 7. If you leave one question from each type on IR, Rohan, you need to understand, if you leave a question, each question has 2 sub questions, right? So if you leave now, I don't want to go into the details, but there are 4 question types. All the 4 question types are equally weighted. Okay, so you will have 2 points for the MSR, you'll have 2 points for the 2-part analysis, you'll have 2 points for the table analysis, and you'll have 2 points for the graphical interpretation. Okay, so each of those questions are equally weighted. Got it? So if you leave one question of each type, if you leave one question of each type, if you're unlucky and none of the questions and the questions you left out are not experimental, then you lose out 3, plus you lose out, say, another 3. So 3 plus 3 is 6. So the maximum you can score is around 6 or 5. Okay, I don't think you'll be able to score a 7 if you leave out one question of each type. To get at least a 40, Anish, you need to have your number of errors in single digits, right? If you're looking at a 38, it's around 8 errors. If you're looking at a 40, 41, it's around 5 to 6 errors. If you're looking at a 44, it's around 4 errors. Okay, 40, a 45, 46 would be around 1 or 2 errors. Okay, so since most of y'all are speaking about the errors aspect of things, right? So I have a very good slide here. Okay, and I've kept it more for quant, because the fluctuation on the quant section is very high as compared to the verbal section. But I'll give you some details on the verbal section also, and this may be of importance for all of you. So what I've done is, I've taken some students. I mean, I interact with a lot of students. So I've taken some students ESRs. Right, ESR is something called an enhanced score report. Every test taker who's taken the Gmat, right, can apply for the ESR. And what I've done with this ESR is I've analyzed this ESR, in a very in-depth manner, and they give you very good pieces of data for you to analyze. Okay, so the first ESR I've taken is of a quant score of 51, and you know in this student CSR who got a 51 on quant, what this ESR also gives you is the breakdown of how many questions he's answered right and how many questions he's answered wrong on the test. So the blue bar obviously represents the ones he's answered right, and the pink bar represents the ones he's answered wrong. Okay, and each of these sections, right, on the quant section, has the first section has 7 questions, 8, 8, and 8. Okay, that's how the split of 32 questions is done: 7, 8, 8, 8. So you see this 29%, if you're good at math, right, and you calculate what 29% is in terms of a fraction, 29% is actually 2 divided by 7. So if all of you all take your pen and paper and you work with 2 by 7, right, you're definitely going to get 0.29 something. So 29% basically means that in the second section, out of the 7 questions that have been considered for his score, he's answered only 2 wrong. Okay, and that 2 wrong questions have still given him a 51 on quant. Okay, so like I said, 2 or 3 errors is what you can maximum afford. I would say 2 errors at this point, right? 1 or 2 errors at this point is what you can afford to get a 51 on the quant section. Okay, now take into comparison this now, right? What happens to a person who's got 50, right? um, so student 2 has got 50, and if you look at his, you know, performance over the all the 4 quarters, you see the first quarter is 100 and 0. He's absolutely started off very well, and he's continued in the same way. He's got 86% and 14%, right? 86 right, 14% wrong. And again, if you change that 14% into a fraction, right, it would correspond to 1 by 7. So basically what has happened, he's answered 1 question wrong in the second, 1 question wrong on the third quarter, and 1 question wrong on the fourth quarter. So 3 questions wrong, and all the questions, you see the line graph here, the pink line, that gives you the difficulty levels of the questions. See, the 3 questions that he's answered wrong are at the higher levels, right? So 3 questions going wrong, 3 to 4 questions going wrong would still give you a 50 on the test. Now let's come to a 49, right? A 49, like you see, one thing I want all of you all to notice is the percentile scores, okay? You see the 50, a 50 is an 88th percentile, but you see the drop here, a 49 is only a 75th percentile. And the reason why that is because you can afford more mistakes when you get a 49. So this is how the breakup is of a test taker who's got a 49 on the test, right? On the second section, he's answered 57% of the questions right, 43% of the questions wrong. Now again, if you reverse engineer that percentage, right, into a fraction, it would correspond to 3 by 7, right? So 3 by 7, if you change it to a fraction, would be 0.42 something something something. So he's answered 3 questions wrong in the second quarter. 29%, like we worked out, is 2 by 7. He's answered 2 questions wrong on the third quarter, and his last quarter has another 2 mistakes. So 3 mistakes on the second, 2 mistakes on the third, 2 mistakes on the last, right? That's a total of 7 errors. So you can afford anywhere between 5 to 7 errors on the quant section. And remember, this data, what the ESR gives you, is data of only the questions that have contributed to his score. Okay, it doesn't have data of the experimental questions at all. So he's made a total of 7 errors, and he still got a 49 on the quant section. Got this? And you look at the errors that he's made again, right? So the line graph gives you the errors that he's made again at the higher levels. So it's okay to make mistakes. It's absolutely fine to make mistakes, you know, on both the quant and the verbal section. So even if the first question goes wrong, right, the first question may have been a 700 level question, right? And you're not going to be penalized too much for getting a 700 level question wrong. Got this? So please do not put yourself under undue pressure if you don't get the first question right. All right. I don't want to go further, but let's look at it right now. Let's look at a 47, a person who's got a 47, and let's again look at the number of errors he's made, right? So on the second section, he's made a total of 3 errors. On the third section, 57% corresponds to 4 by 7. So on the third section, he's made 4 errors, and in the last section, another 4 errors. So 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 plus 3 gives him 11. So if you make approximately 8 to 10 errors, 8 to 9 errors, you're going to end up with a 48. And you make 10 to 11 errors, you're going to end up with a 47. Got this? So this is the number of errors that you can afford on the quant section, right? On the verbal section, like I said, if you keep the number of errors in single digits, you definitely would be in the 30s. If you have around 7 to 8 errors on the verbal section, your score would definitely be somewhere in the range of a 35 to 36. Okay. Now one added rider attached here, right? One added rider attached here is see, for somebody typed in there, you got a 29 with 13 mistakes, right? Now you need to understand that what the practice test gives you, right? What the practice test gives you is it just gives you the score based on the algorithm. It doesn't tell you what are the difficulty levels of the questions that you got wrong, right? You see these difficulty levels. So if you've got a 29 and you made 13 mistakes, right, out of the entire set of 36, that means that the bulk of the 13 mistakes that you made are on the easy and medium. You've not even gone to the higher level. So your errors are somewhere here at this point, right? So if you've not gone to the higher levels, then obviously your score is going to be impacted a little more, right? So it's always better, and that just reiterates my point that I made, right? It's always better to make mistakes at the higher levels. It's okay to make mistakes, but the mistakes should always be at higher levels. Got it? So I think that should answer your question of getting a 29 and a 13. Yeah, Shivanshu, again, if you got a 44 with 9 mistakes, again, that basically means that the errors that you made are on the lower levels of questions, right? You see this person, right? You see, I'll just compare this, I'll just expand this slide for those who cannot see it. This person has answered a total of 11 mistakes, but you see the errors that he has made? You see the line graph here, the pink line? It's starting at the slowly closer to the higher levels, and then it's just staying between the medium and the highs. If you've got a 44, right, high chance that this pink line would actually be a little lower. So the medium levels of questions have gone wrong. So what happens when the medium levels of the questions go wrong? If the medium level questions go wrong, then you're not even going to get higher levels of questions where you can score higher. Okay. And this also brings to my point that and this is one question that I always get. Okay, and I want to address this right away. If you're at a 40, if you're stuck at a 44 on quant, anything less than a 47 on quant, okay, if you've got anything between a 44 and 47 on quant, and if you're of the assumption that I need to work only on the harder levels of questions, then you're completely misinformed. If you're stuck with a score between 44 and 47, you have not even seen the harder levels of questions. Okay, you have not even seen the harder levels of questions on your test. You have got the medium and the medium high questions wrong. So what your focus should be is, how do I get these questions right so that I can reach that stage of getting the harder questions, because this is an adaptive test. Harder questions going wrong, not going to impact your score too much. Got it? So that's how you read into your 44 with 9 errors. Okay. So for those who are, those who pinged in that group that I got a 44 with 9 errors, the reason you got that 9 errors is the reason you got the lower score with 9 errors is because the difficulty levels were different. It sets the tone of your test, Shivanshu. So the first 10 questions, right, they set the tone of your test, because now after the first 10 questions, the computer or the algorithm has some data of how you've performed in the previous test. So what happens, it starts giving you harder questions. So once you get the harder questions right, you can afford some mistakes. But if you start making mistakes on the easier ones, that's a big problem. Got this? So I've just taken an ESR, and I just want to give all of you all an understanding of how things work. Okay. 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 So any other questions? No. I'm not saying for the first 10 questions you should take more time, Gaurav. I would say you spend equal amounts of time on each question, but on the first 10 questions, I would definitely be a little more careful about picking my answer, because you'll be prone to falling for traps. You'll be prone to making very silly errors. Okay. I can open up an ESR for verbal too, Ganesh. So that is also fine. But I just wanted to give you a sense of how it works, in terms of difficulty levels, right? So I don't have an ESR right now with me, and I wouldn't want to open it here because it's a student's name on it, and I don't want to, reveal the student's name. So I've just edited the names and so on. I've just removed that portion which has the name, right? So it's similar to the quant section. It's similar to the quant section. You have the difficulty levels, and you have the errors that are made, right? So I'm telling you, based on the reverse engineering of those percentages, if you're looking at a 36, you can afford around 8 to 9 errors. Okay, and again that 36, if you got around 8 to 9 errors, it should be on the higher levels of questions. With 8 to 9 errors, you can still get a 29 or a 30 or a 32. Okay, perfect. So now see, I mean, I expected all of these questions, right? No, Yashwant. In quant, you can afford lesser mistakes than verbal. Okay, in quant, you can only afford lesser mistakes because the number of experimental questions on quant is 3. The number of experimental questions on verbal is 6. Okay, and the problem with quant, no, you saw the drop in percentile, right? You see 47 here on quant, right? The slide that I have here, 47 is what? The 68th percentile, right? 60, yeah, 47 is 68th percentile. So you'll need to understand that with the 48 on quant, with the 47 on quant, that's not a very good score. If you look at it as 47 on 51, it's a good score, but 47 in terms of a percentile, not very good. Okay, so with quant, right? If you start making more mistakes, you end up getting a 46, 47. That's not going to be good for your verbal score because you'll need to improve your verbal score by approximately 1.5 points to get back the equivalent 3-digit score that you're looking at. We'll come to the time splits. I'm going to deal with that again. Okay. Yeah, Shivanshu, it's 9 each. It's not 9 each. Remember, I told you 6 questions are experimental, right? So the 30 questions are divided into each section like this. You have 7, 7, 8, and 8. Okay. So 8 plus 8 is 16. 16 plus 7 is 23. 23 plus 7 gives you 30. So it's 8, 8, 7, 7. Okay, you can understand which sections have the 7 and which sections have the 8 based on the percentages that are given in the graph. Okay, so if you've got a ESR, you can have a look at it yourself. Okay, guys, so most of you are asking me this question on are the first 10 questions important, and everything hinges on the first 10 questions. Yes. So things hinge sometimes on the first 10 questions because, like I said, right, you're more prone to making silly errors. Okay, and this is what I think a person who's starting off, their last phase of prep, right? You have around 1 month left, and you're taking practice tests, and you take up one practice test, you analyze the practice, and you figure out you've made certain mistakes. There's always a pattern towards your mistakes. Okay, there's always certain things that you'll always go wrong at, right? It's how you learn from the mistakes that's much more important. So what I've done, right, just to give you a sense of what the errors might be, you can't skip questions, Manu. That it's an adaptive test, right? So you have to answer every question before you go to the next, right? It's not possible for you to skip a question and come back. It's important. When you say skip, I'm assuming you just guess on some questions, right? Yeah. I'll tell you how to take a logical guess towards the end, right? I will tell you how to work with that. If you're running short of time, you have timing issues, I'll tell you how to address that. And if you're looking at guessing on a question, I'll tell you how to make that guess also. Okay. So just to cater to what I meant by you being a little Aparna, verbal section is also adaptive, right? I think then if you're asking me this question, then you're new to the Gmat, right? So I don't think the session will make sense to you because both the quant and verbal sections are adaptive. Okay. Um, so what I have, guys, is just a teaser. Okay, what I've done is I've just collated certain questions that students sent me as doubts. After a practice test, right? So I just collated what I feel are important ones. So I have a question here. Okay, I have a question here. It just helps me make a point of how you need to approach questions and what do you need to do if you get this question wrong. How do you analyze this question and what do you actually write down in your error log, right? I'm sure at some point of your prep, you would have heard this term, you have to maintain an error log. So what exactly do you put in an error log? How do you maintain it and how do you utilize it to your advantage, right? So what I want all of you all to do is it maybe give you some practice also. I want all of you all to take up this question. Okay, give it a shot. I'll give you all of you all 2 minutes. I want all of you all to type in the answer in the chat window only after I ask you to do so. So take 2 minutes, work through it, We'll have an in-depth discussion on it, and I'll show you what I would take away from this question and what I would put in the error log if you get it wrong. Okay, so take your 2 minutes. Start now. That's fine, Saurabh. Don't worry. Don't worry. Anyway, I'm getting a mixed bag of answers, so it's absolutely fine. Tanisha, like I said, right, I think you're new to the Gmat. I don't think this session would make sense for you because you're not aware of what a data sufficiency is. Okay, guys, last call for answers. All right. So let's have a discussion. Okay, so I'm not worried about how many of y'all answered it right and how many of y'all answered it wrong, but to be, if you look at the chat window, right, we've got a mixed bag of answer choices on this. Okay, what I'm going to do is when I solve the question, right, um, there will be points at which you've made a mistake. Okay, so that exactly the point that you've made a mistake, and you figure out why you've made your mistake. That's the point you write in your error log. For example, I see many of y'all gave me B and D as your answer choices. Almost 75% of those who gave me an answer choice gave me B and D, right? Now the reason why you did that, and let me reverse engineer this process. The question asks you, is x by 18 an integer, right? The first statement tells you 3x by 18 is an integer. Now for those who mark B and D, what y'all did is y'all, especially for D first, let me analyze D first. All of y'all assumed that x was an integer. All of y'all assumed, who marked D as the answer, right? Y'all assumed that x was an integer, and you said if 3x by 18 is an integer, x has to be 18. No, x can be 6 too, right? X can be 18 also. So if x is 6, 3 into 6 is 18, 18 by 18 is an integer. Is 6 by 18 an integer? No. If x is equal to 18, 18 by 18 is an integer, yes. So the first statement clearly is not sufficient. So what you will have to add in your error log is the first point, do not assume that variables are integers. Or another point you can make is whenever you don't have constraints in a question, right? Especially when you're dealing with the data sufficiency, you don't have constraints on a variable. You have to check for all types of values. You cannot only constrain your thinking to integers. So the first statement clearly is insufficient. The second statement says that 5x by 18 is an integer. And for those who mark B, again, what you all did is you all assumed that x is an integer, and you said since 5 and 18 are prime numbers, or 5 and 18 are co-primes to each other, or numbers which don't have a common factor, you said x has to be a multiple of 18. Now that's very bad analysis, right? X can be 18, I agree with you on that, but x can also be 18 by 5, right? X can also be 18 by 5, because 5 into 18 by 5 would still give me an integer, isn't it? So if x is 18, if I answer the main question, this would give me a yes. But if I take x is 18 by 5 and answer the main question, 18 by 5 divided by 18 is going to give me 1 by 5, which gives me a no. So the first statement and the second statement both are insufficient individually. Out goes B. So what you will have to again add in your error log is not to make an assumption when analyzing that variables are integers. You will also have to check for fractions. And that again comes back to the point that when you don't have a constraint in a question, you don't analyze. You always put in values and you check for all types of values. Now, for those who gave me C as the answer, you've done it absolutely perfectly. C is the answer. For those who gave me echo as the answer, what you all have overlooked is you all have not combined these two statements in the best possible way. What you should do is you should add this point in your error log. Whenever you're combining statements, right? Whenever you're combining statements, it's very, very difficult for you to use values again. It's very difficult to put in a value of x which satisfies both statements simultaneously. I can put in an integer, x is equal to 18, but I don't know what fraction that I can put which satisfies both. So the better thing to do is for you to algebraically manipulate the two statements and try to answer what question is being asked. I have 3x by 18 is an integer, and I have 5x by 18 to be an integer. Now from these two pieces of information, I need to get information about x by 18. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply my first statement by 2 on both sides. So 2 into 3x by 18 gives me 6x by 18, and an integer into 2 is an integer. And from the second statement, I have 5x by 18 is an integer. Now if I subtract the two, I'm going to get x by 18 is an integer minus another integer, which gives me another integer. So for those who skipped C and marked E, right, what you should add in your error log is when you're combining statements, you can always substitute one statement into the other, or you can use any mathematical operation that you want between the two statements, which lead to answering the main question. You should always think of solving it algebraically and trying to answer what question is being asked. Correct? So you see what I meant by, silly mistakes on questions, right? This would be categorized. I would say this is not more than a 620 or 630 level question, okay? Because the trap here lies in the fact that you overlook the fact that x can also be fractions. Got this? So all of you all need to understand certain things, right? When you solve questions, the point is not solving and getting to an answer and that's reading the explanation and then saying, okay, I should have done this. The point is, what do you take back from this? So only with this question, I already gave you 3 takeaways. Don't assume that variables are integers, especially when in data sufficiency question, you don't have constraints given to you. Second, don't assume, or the best thing to do when you combine statements is to use one statement into the other or use a mathematical operation between the two, right? There's so many things that you can take away from a question, and that is what you need to add in your error log. And as you go on doing this, right, for more and more and more questions, your error log just keeps increasing. and once you refer to your error log again, right, you'll realize that, okay, now these are the points that I have to take care of. And when you work with questions, right, those will naturally strike your head, or it just come to mind whenever you're working with actually doing a practice test, right? You'll realize that, okay, I know the trap here is for me to assume that x is an integer. I'm not going to assume, I'm going to put a fraction for this. So that's just giving you a teaser of what kind of errors people make, right? So if you made that first error of B and D, right, then I know that you're still at this 42, 43, 44 level on quant, because you're not able to get beyond this point because you've not learned from the mistakes that you're making. Okay, so the key is to how what you take back and how you learn from those mistakes. Okay, with this, guys, I just give you a teaser just to you know give you a sense of what is how things are tested and what you need to work with. Okay, with this, all of y'all. Perfect. Okay, so let's try this too. Okay, let's try this too. Let's try one more question, and I'll give you a takeaway here also, and then we'll go into a little more generic discussion. Okay, so your 2 minutes start now. Hetal, if you're looking at a 700, you've got a 600, 620, right? And you have your test on 19, then I don't think that's going to transform itself into 700 directly, right? So it makes sense to revisit your test date, right? And see how you can improve from that 620. Got this? Okay. Last call for answers. So quickly type in your answer in the chat window. Okay. So now the reason why I picked this question, right? This is actually an official question. Um, So I couldn't use the exact official question, so I've changed the variables. It is actually in A and B. I've put it in terms of X and Y. But um, why the Gmat, the quant section especially becomes tricky, right? And this is where people normally, and this is a pattern that I've seen very recently occur with students who are taking up the test now in the new pattern of the Gmat, right? The quant section is becoming harder. Okay, we've taken feedback from students who've taken up the test in the past 2 months, and the feedback that all of them have given is the questions have actually become harder. There are more word problems on the GMAT, and questions. So most of the questions nowadays test you on multiple concepts at once. Okay, they don't only test you on one or two concepts, and the questions are actually tricky. Okay, they'll actually make you think about things in depth. For those who answered C on this question, a big pat on your back. Absolutely right. Absolutely fine. No problems in the way you've analyzed. All right. For those who got A, and most of y'all have given A as the answer, right? This is what you'll have to take back from this question, and this is a common error, common trap that people fall for on inequalities or equations, algebraic equations. All of y'all for sure would have opened up the brackets on the right hand side, and you would have said xy plus xy square, right? And then you would cancel out xy and xy square on both sides, because you can add or subtract anything in an inequality. And you're going to end up getting this question to be broken down to, is x square y greater than 0? And this is what differentiates a person who's a little, who's actually a little more careful on test day, and a person who's not. All of y'all who gave me A as the answer, y'all gave me A as the answer because y'all said that if x square y has to be greater than 0, then x square is positive. I don't need to worry about the sign of x square. I just need information that y is greater than 0. And that's why you picked A. But what y'all overlooked is that x square here could have been 0 itself. You assumed that x square is always going to be positive, which is not right. X square is actually non-negative. It can be 0 or positive. So what you all overlooked here was a 0 case. Let's look at it, right? Y is greater than 0. Now I know if x is positive and y is greater than 0, this would definitely give me a yes to the main question. But if x is 0 and y is also greater than 0, then 0 into 0 can't be greater than 0, right? This would answer the question with a no. So the first statement clearly is insufficient. The second statement tells me xy is greater than 0. Now xy being greater than 0 just tells me both x and y both have the same sign. It doesn't tell me anything about x square y being greater than 0 or not, because I know x square will be positive, but y can either be positive or negative, right? So I can't for sure say x square y is greater than 0. So out goes B. Now when I combine the two statements, right? When I combine the two statements, the fact that y is greater than 0 and the fact that xy is greater than 0 basically tells me if y is greater than 0, y has to be positive. And for me to satisfy the second statement, even x has to be positive. So here now when I put the two statements together, I know that x for sure is positive, and now I know x square will also always be positive. So that's enough information for me to answer the question. Got it? So what all of y'all, Anaga, I think again you'll have to revisit the concept of inequalities, right? So the question you're asking me is basic inequality questions that you cannot cancel on both sides only if it's multiplication or division, right? You can cancel it if it's an addition or subtraction, right? You can cancel things when it's an addition or subtraction. So if you have, like, let me give you an example, right? If you have 5 is less than 3 or 5 is less than 8, right? If I subtract 2 on both sides, the inequality sign will never change. It will still give me 3 less than 6. Got it? Kush, I just said that when you put the two statements together, the first statement tells me y is positive and the second statement gives me xy is greater than 0, right? If y has to be positive, then in xy, y has to be positive. And if I have to satisfy the second statement, xy is greater than 0, right? even x has to be positive. So the zero case of a zero where x can take zero, right? That case is negated because now x can only be positive. And if x is positive, x square is also positive. Got it? All right. So Anaga, what you'll have to do is you'll have to revisit your rules of inequalities. All right. See, I wouldn't say this is a 700 level. Okay, I would say it's more in the range of a 680, 690, 670, right? I'm not going to plug in numbers, Ayushman. That's a very horrible way to work out an inequality. Okay. No, the 100 questions are not official questions. Okay. So guys, one thing you need to understand, see, when you identify, right, that there is a conceptual gap, right, that you're saying that you cannot cancel out variables on an inequality, you need to understand that there is a conceptual gap there. You need to go back to that concept and revisit things. Correct? You can cancel out anything you want on both sides. You can add or subtract. The rule is you can add or subtract anything you want on both sides of an inequality, but you cannot multiply or divide, right? Because if you multiply or divide, you don't know whether the sign is going to flip or remain the same. Okay. Okay with this, guys? Okay with the point I'm making of how you need to, maintain your error log, what points you need to add in that error log, and how you need to work with things? Chetan, it's not about you practicing more which undoes this silly mistakes, right? It's you being consciously, aware that you've made this mistake and you trying to root this out, when you work out questions. So you have to be a little careful. All right. Okay, so let's get back to an initial discussion on things, right? So, okay. Okay, so another question that most of you all asked was the timing aspect of things, right? I tell this to every student who comes to me and speaks to me and says that I run short of time. Believe me, guys, every question, and I mean every question on the Gmat, right, can be solved in 2 to 2.5 minutes, sometimes under 2 minutes, right? Any quant question, even the harder ones, maybe the harder ones would require 2.5 minutes sometimes, but they will on an average be able to solve in 2 minutes. And any verbal question also on an average can be solved in 2 minutes. But if you're facing some problem on time, right, then what we recommend is a timing strategy for both quant and verbal. It's not a timing strategy of sorts, it's more of being a little more structured in how you take up the test, right? Like I said, right, the quant section has 32 questions. So what we've done, and you have 62 minutes here, right, and you have 65 minutes here. So what we normally recommend to students is you split up the 62 minutes on quant as 15, 15, 15, and finally 17. And you split up the 65 minutes on verbal as 15, 15, 15, and 20. Okay. You basically make 4 different quarters, and each quarter is of a 15-minute section, and you keep the last section as 17 minutes and 20 minutes respectively. On the quant section, right, your first 15 questions, in the first 15 minutes, you should target 7 questions. Okay. Why I'm keeping 15 minutes, 7 questions? Because you tend to start off a little slow, right? You'll need some time to to get accustomed to that pressure scenario of taking up the test and so on. So you might read things a little more carefully. So it's okay to do 7 questions there. Your second 15, since you're in the groove of taking the test, should be 8 questions. Your third section of 15 again should be 8. And finally, your last section of 17 minutes should be the difference, right? 8 plus 8 gives you 16. 16 plus 7 gives you 23. So you need, remember, you have 31 questions on quant, right? So the last section should have 8 questions again. Got it? Why am I again telling you the last section of 17 minutes for 8 questions? You're giving a little more than 2 minutes. Is because if your exam is going well, right? If your test is going well, you're in that range of 47, 48. The bulk of these last 8 questions would be approximately in that range, right? So you'll need to spend some time on working it and getting to an answer. So 15, 15, 15, 17, and your split should be, I should target 7 questions, 8 questions, 8 questions, and 8. Now, how this helps you out is, if on the quant section, right, you see that the clock is ticked down from 62 to 47, that's your first 15-minute section. And you've just finished your 6th, you've gone to your 7th. What I would do at this point, if you're running short of time, I would just skip the 7th, or not skip it, I would say I would just make a guess on the 7th and move on. Why would I do that? Because it's okay to take a hit in between, in the middle of your test, rather than, you know, you being in a scenario of having 4 to 5 questions to answer in the end and with a minute remaining. Okay, because you're going to be penalized a lot for leaving questions unanswered. You're going to be penalized a lot for getting continuous string of errors. It's okay for the errors to be strewn about in the entire set of 31 questions rather than it being bunched up towards the end. Okay, so if you're running short of time, right, and you've spent a little too much time, it's okay to let a question go so that you don't fall into the trap of, you know, marking the last few questions in very less time. Okay, and remember, you should always have the thought process of, I am not looking at getting this particular question right or wrong. I am looking at the end result. Okay, I am looking at how I perform over the entire course of 31 questions. On the verbal section, how we recommend you split this, remember you have a total of 36 questions, right? So what we recommend is, in the first 15-minute section, again, you should target 8 questions. The second 15-minute section, again 8. The third, again 8. And in the last 20-minute section, you're going to try to target 12 questions. Okay, so 8 3s are 24, 24 plus 12 gives you the 36. That's how you would work with on the verbal section. So if you're on the 7th question on verbal and your clock is ticked down from 62 to 47, or it's ticked down from 65 to 50, say, right, then in that case, I would just skip on the 8th one and move on to the 9th, right? I wouldn't waste my time on that and be left out with, you know, one horrible RC passage towards the end. You need to understand, in your last set of questions, there will definitely be one RC that pops up, and which is going to be a big time killer. So you'll have to be very, very, very careful in how you phase out the entire test. Okay, so this is a timing strategy that we all recommend for people to use. You can tweak this strategy if you want. This is what we normally recommend, right? You can maybe change it around if you want to keep only, instead of keeping 4 quarters, you wanted to keep it as 3 quarters. That's absolutely fine, right? But I'm just giving you an idea of how you need to tweak this. Now, how do you reduce the time spent on questions? Okay, most students ask me this question, right? I spend too much of time on a question. Instead of solving it in 2 minutes, I take 2.5 minutes. On a sentence correction question, I take, instead of 1.5 minutes, I take 2 minutes 15 seconds. And if I start trying to reduce the time, then my accuracy goes for a toss. If I start increasing the time, my accuracy is fine, but my but my timing is not up to the mark. Now, there are 2 ways you can reduce the time spent. Okay, the most important is the review. When you're reviewing a question, right? When you're reviewing a question, the best thing to do, and this is what most test takers don't do, the best thing to do is for all of you all to review the questions, not only the questions you've answered wrong, review what you've got right. Right? Review what you've answered right, in addition to what you've got wrong. Okay. Why I'm asking you to do this? Because in sentence correction, right, which clearly is a time saver, if you're able to review a question and you look at an explanation, maybe on the Crack Verbal forum, on Gmat Club forum, or the MGMat forum, if you do an in-depth analysis, right, on a question, you would have eliminated an answer choice maybe based on one particular concept. You would have said, okay, I can eliminate this based on modifiers. But the explanation also provides you an alternate way to eliminate an answer choice. Maybe there's an idiom that you could have idiom issue that you could have analyzed, right? There would have been maybe a subject verb agreement issue that you overlooked, right? So if you analyze the questions, right, and you've tried to figure out what all errors you can get in a question, and you keep doing this as a process for a good set of 100 to 150 questions, when it comes to the harder questions, right, when it comes to a question on test day, all you will require is one of those, one of those processes of eliminating the answer choice to strike you on test day, right? So suddenly when you look at this question, you see, okay, there's an EDM issue. I'm going to knock this off and move on, right? I'm not going to look at modifiers. I'm not going to look at subject verb agreement. I already found my error, right? So you would get better at, picking your answer choice, faster at picking your answer choice. And the second thing that we, or I personally would recommend is for you to, in your last month of preparation, start working practice sets, right? Take up questions in such a way that you take 31 questions in quant and you work it out in 62 minutes, and you do 36 questions on verbal and you work it out in 65 minutes. You always, maybe on a daily basis, if you can, right, if you're able to put in a good part of 3 hours of prep, I would personally work out one entire quant set and one entire verbal set. So if I'm able to do one set of practice questions on, say, on a Monday, and I don't have time after that, I would sit on a Tuesday and I would analyze all the 31 questions of quant and all the 36 questions on verbal, right? And the reason I would do that, and how I'd analyze things on quant, obviously, the normal procedure would be a conventional process of working. I would look at an alternate way of working, or maybe using the answer choices. Maybe I could have eliminated a couple of the answer choices, used one of the 3 answer choices, and got to my answer quicker, right? You'll have to analyze the answer choices very, very carefully there, right? So make sure that you work with practice sets, and again, analyze these practice sets. Very, 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 very important. One, you're doing time practice, and the second, you're also analyzing. So you're doing the review, right? So this is definitely going to help you reduce the time that you're going to spend on questions, right? So the reason why sometimes, some people come, and somebody asked me this in the beginning also, that when I work with questions, and on the homework questions, I know what concept is being tested, right? I know that I have to search for a modifier. I know I have to search for parallelism. So the advantage of working the questions in terms of practice sets, right? You also tune your mind to juggle between different concepts at once. So once you tune your mind to juggle between different concepts, right, you'll realize where your conceptual knowledge is lacking and where it is really, really strong. So once you figure out the problem areas, you can actually go back and fix it. In verbal, is it a good strategy to read the question stem first? Definitely yes, right? Manu, when you say the question stem first, I mean, you're saying you're going to read the passage first and then go to the questions, right? That's what you meant by saying, right? Or you saying the reverse? Never a good sign to read the question and then go back to the argument. No, definitely not. Definitely not. See, what I personally would do is, the target should be around 7 to 7.5 minutes on a RC, right? I would spend around 3.5 to 4 minutes, right? 4 minutes is like pushing it, unless it is a really long RC. I would spend around 3.5 to 4 minutes on reading the entire RC, right? And then I would spend the remaining, say, 4 minutes or 3 minutes to answer the questions. I would give each question a minute, right? Debashish, like I said, right, I don't think pre-thinking, I would never endorse pre-thinking, because what happens with pre-thinking, right? It depends on what points you have come up with. It will also, what happens with pre-thinking, you'll start going tangential to what the argument is giving. So you'll bring in sometimes too many extra pieces of information that is not relevant to the question. Okay, when you work with CR questions, right, you always have to learn to stay within the purview of the question. So it's always better on the harder levels of questions, right? You stay within the purview. Don't try to pre-think, but work with your answer choices. And once you work with your answer choices, when you read an answer choice, you would that once you read a point in an answer choice, right, you will think, okay, this is something I would have pre-thought, right? And you would hold on to the answer choice. And when you see the next answer choice, you see, okay, this is something I wouldn't have pre-thought, but it makes logical sense. So I would keep that answer choice too. And the other 3 answer choices you can eliminate. So you have to be a little careful here, okay? You have to be a little careful when you work with harder levels of CR questions. Don't try to put a structure behind solving a CR question of trying to pre-think everything. It's impossible for everybody to pre-think the same points on that question and that what the question asks you to do. It's better for you to use your answer choices there. Kirti, See, I mean, it depends upon person to person, right? So if you're asking me what do you start with quant, verbal, and IR in AWA, I'm assuming that people will always take the quant or the verbal sections first. Now, what I normally recommend is for you to figure out what is good for you. So if you feel that you're prone to making silly errors, right? Then it's better for you to take the verbal section first because you'll be a little more careful reading things, and then go to quant. And when you go to the quant section, you're in that peak zone of concentration. But if you feel that you're more of a person who wants to get done with quant because that's a strong point, then I would take quant section first, right? I will never start with AW and IR and waste my time on that. Okay, I would use what I'm comfortable with it with IR and I mean with quant and verbal. Believe me, the IR section actually drains your energy because you'll be running against the clock every time. No, Manu, it's not a good idea to summarize each para in RC and make an overall summary. When you're working with the para, it's important for you to hold on to only the important points. So when you summarize each para, you only hold on to the important points, and that itself forms the overall summary for you. Okay. No, Manu. It's better for you to read the RC, make a summary as you read, and then work with the questions. Ganesh, you determine which section you want to start based on your practice test, right? My advice for those of you all wondering what to do, whether to start with quant or verbal, take one practice test where you start with quant, take another practice test where you start with verbal, and you determine based on your performance and based on your mental, the mental comfort, whether the first would be better or the second would be better. Yes, Sunmeet, you can go ahead with the questions, please. No problem. I mean, the other slides I have is another 2 questions to work with. I don't want to bring in questions here and make it more mathematical. Okay. Okay. Okay, guys. So, just one specific pointer. Just one specific pointer here. Ganesh, I can't do questions. It'll just make this a practice session then, right? I'm here to answer what questions you guys have. Yes. So coming to that, somebody already asked me that. So what are the resources to use and tests to give? Okay. Now this is important, right? Now I'll bifurcate this into, I'm assuming all of you all would have taken some practice tests because you've done your initial preparation. I'll bifurcate this into people who are at an overall score of around 640 to let's keep 620 to around 660, and I will do this to be around second to be around 660 to around 700. And the third section I'll deal with in the next slide will be around for people who are already getting a 700 and above. Okay. Now, what are the resources you use when you're at a 620 and a 660? Um, in both cases, advanced documents, okay, that we provide, right? Official Gmat questions, absolutely imperative that you work with them. Now, what is the difference between this and this? What does a person here have to do differently? A person in that 620 to 660 range, right? There are a lot more problem areas compared to a person in the 660 to 700 range. You will have 2 to 3 topics which are problem areas. You will have timing issues. You will have, you won't be comfortable with certain types of questions and so on. So my advice for you is use the advanced documents to identify the topics and use the advanced documents to work with timed practice sets. Okay. For a person in the 660 to 700 region, right? There are only very specific topics that you're going to struggle at. For example, the normal topics that people struggle at this point, no, based on my experience, is inequalities, absolute values, right? Permutations, combinations, probability. some struggle in coordinate geometry, some struggle on number theory. So you figure out what topics are actually creating an issue. What we have done with the advanced documents is we've segregated the advanced documents into topics. So you work with topic-based practice, right? Topic-based practice on those specific areas and try to improve your accuracy on those areas, right? And in your case, I would also recommend this. I would recommend that you use a Veritas Prep question bank. It's not an official resource, and I would only recommend this once you finish the advanced documents. But what happens with this question bank, right? Is you're going to get you can actually vary, or you can use the Gmat Club one. Okay, this is also very good for the quant, not very good for verbal, right? Use a Gmat Club resource or the Veritas Prep questions, and you pick specific questions on the topics, right? That you're going to be a little weak at, and you can also make timed sets, timed practice sets of maybe 10 questions on quant and 10 questions on verbal on a daily basis based on these problem areas, right? For a person who's already at the range of, right, 700 and above, there's one resource that I personally would recommend is Advanced Gmat Quant from Gmat. Very good resource. Hard questions to work with, right? And it has 15 worksheets, 15 work sets towards the end, each of 10 questions. So it's 150 questions of really high level questions, something in the range of 47, 48, 49. You also have an advanced Gmat verbal that you can find on Gmat Club. Okay, this is a collection of all official hard 700 level verbal questions that you can work with. Okay, just a added rider on this. Just make sure that you've completed all your official practice tests before you use this document that you'll find on Gmat Club, right? Because the questions there, most of the questions will be questions from the official practice test. Okay, and it's a collection of only the 700 level ones. So if you're at that range of 700 level and more, then my advice is for you to use these two resources and focus on those two, right? If you're anywhere less than a 620, guys, I think you'll have to rethink your test date, because I wouldn't recommend that you go ahead with a test in a month. You'll require more like a month and a half or two, just to make things a little structured in your preparation. See if you and basically see all of these things I'm saying with respect to the fact I'm assuming that most of y'all are working professionals, and you can put in around 2 to 3 hours of work per day. If you're not working, right, and you have the entire day to you, then you can definitely crunch things up in a month's time by putting around 5 to 6 hours of work per day. But ideally, I would say 3 to 4 hours is what maximum prep is you can afford to give on the Gmat. Okay, because remember, it's not what more you learn, it's how you take away things from the question that is important. So these are the resources that I would recommend. I would very strongly suggest, especially for verbal, stick to the advanced documents. Please do not use any other resource other than official questions for verbal. For quant, I'm giving you other resources as well, because the official guide, the verbal review, and the official material normally will not have questions which are a bulk of them will not be of the 700 level kinds. The advanced documents is the question bank. Okay, the advanced documents is the question bank. Shivanshu, language in the ESR section, right? Language is basically where you'll have to use the meaning of the sentence to eliminate, and grammar is where you use the grammar rules. Okay. Guys, I mean, advanced documents, I mean, all our students normally would get it, right? I think it's also available on a website, so you can just go and download it. If you want it, you can just send in an email to prep@crackverbal, guys, and we can send you the link for the advanced documents, right? But it should be available in your study plan. Or check your entire mail string, right? There'll definitely be one mail titled question bank. You can click on that link and download all the question banks. Yes, Chetan, it's absolutely fine. You can use the 2014 version itself. Yes, there are solutions to the advanced docs, but RCs don't have the solutions. There are solutions for sentence correction and critical reasoning. Not many students look for solutions in RC. Okay, so and even if you don't have solutions, right, you can always look them up on Google, right? You can just take a Gmat club link and work with that. Kush, how to eliminate questions we'll look at once we have a specific session on verbal and sentence correction and so on, right? I mean it's a very specific question you're asking me how to eliminate questions. I have to take a question and show you, and it'll depend upon how I eliminate an answer choice will depend upon all different types of things, right? So for a CR for CR one big issue that people have is how do I pick between the last two answer choices? What do I do to pick between the two? So the only answer I have, right, is for you to become better of picking one of the two answer choices towards the end. The review process that I mentioned, right, after you work out every question, that is going to help you make the fine difference between picking either answer A or answer B. So just make sure that the review process is a little more structured in your case. Got this? Now, how many practice tests do you take? Right? How many practice tests do you take before your test? Um, Ideally, in the last 1 month, right? In the last 1 month, um, I recommend that you take, if you're working and you have approximately, you're working on the weekdays and you have weekends to be relatively free, I would want you to take up one practice test every weekend, right? One practice test every weekend. So remember, you have two free official tests that you can take on the MBA.com website, and you have 4 paid official tests, right? So you have a total of 6 official tests to work with. I would recommend only you use these 6 official tests. For people who are at a 49 or a 50 on quant in the official tests, then in your case, I would represent that you use the Manhattan Gmat set of tests, okay? Because the quant section is slightly harder. It'll actually challenge you. But remember the risk that you take if you use the Manhattan Gmat test is that the algorithm will not be exactly the same as the official ones. The official ones are what we always endorse. They are the only tests that are as close to the actual Gmat as possible, right? So the 4 paid tests, right, is what we would take in your last 1 month on every weekend, right? So this is how I would normally structure my weekend, right? On and let me put it this way. Say a weekend starts on Monday, right? On Monday, right, I would do a revision of all concepts of verbal and quant, right? And when I say revision, right, I mean revisiting your error log, looking at the small pointers that you made, right? Making a note of things, make a mental note of things, right? On Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? On each of these days, I would work one timed practice set, one timed set of 31 questions on quant and 36 questions on verbal. Okay, one time set. For this, you can use the advanced documents, make a set of 31 questions, make a set of 36 questions, and then work with it. Or you can introduce, for the quant section, you maybe can use the Veritas Prep Question Bank, because it's a software that you can use. It's more of an online format. You can actually select how many problem solving questions, how many data sufficiency questions, how many critical reasoning RC and CR, right? So of the 31 questions, no, this is how you would split it. You would select 17 problem solving questions and 14 data sufficiency questions. Okay, this is the normal split that occurs on test day, 17 and 14. For the 36 questions on verbal, right, it's an approximate equal split. I would say 12 sentence correction questions, around 12 critical reasoning questions, and 4 RC passages, right? Sometimes some people get 3 RC passages, long ones, but ideally you would get 4 RC passages, right? So you can make your 36 question set based on this and work it out on each one of these days. On Saturday, I would take up my practice test, okay? And Sunday, I would leave for an entire review of the test and revision of the error log, okay? So that's exactly how I would phase out my entire set of 4 weeks towards the end. No, it's free. The Veritas Prep Question Bank is free. Just go and Google it, please. You just need an ID and you just need a Gmail ID to work with, right? It's good, but like I said, no, use only these Ganesh after you finish the official questions. Okay, don't use it, you know, um, as an alternative to your official questions. Finish the official questions and then use it. Okay. What are the tests to take and check the level if one is going to for a second attempt, one is exhausted official prep test? I got repeated questions on each test. Yes, Sunmeet. So if you're a retaker, right? Good question. So I'll cater to that. If you're a retaker, right? If you're a retaker, then there are only two sets of tests that I would say are trustworthy, right? The first is the Gmat set of tests. Remember what I told you, the added rider here, the quant section is hard, the verbal section is pretty much, it's slightly easier than what you get on the actual test, or the Veritas prep set of tests, okay? Veritas prep practice tests. These are the only ones that we would recommend other than the official resources if you've exhausted all the official sources. Remember, again, star and star, only after exhausting official resources. Okay. Please do not use them as alternatives to your official test. Finish your official test and then work with things. Got this? Okay. Okay, guys. So, any other questions that you have for me? I'm all ears. I have another, say, 10 minutes that I can dedicate to all of your questions. So I'll try to take all your questions, because see, the reason why I kept this webinar is because many students send an email to prep with exactly the queries you had. So I wanted to get onto a forum and then discuss all of these in person rather than typing in each and every mail out to you, right? So we have 10 minutes. I'm just going to keep it now to be an entire set of questions that you ask me, and I will answer to that. Okay. Nitesh, rule of thumb is uh, if you get a 770 and if you see that there's a lot of questions that repeat, right? Just deduct 100 points. Simple as that. Okay. If you found one or two repeats, no, if you found one or two or three repeats, then I would say a 770 would be something like a 720. But ideally, right, it's not good for you to retake the test and critically analyze your score, because obviously it's an inflated score. You can retake the test to look at the other questions that are there in that question set. Yes, Rishabh. In the last week, I would take one mock, right? I wouldn't take a mock. I wouldn't take a mock 2 days before my exam, right? I would take a mock maybe 3 days before my actual scheduled date. Rupam, many students ask me this nowadays, and the reason why they ask me, this, that I can leave an entire RC to get a V35 is because I think some of you all would have looked at some interview of a student who said he left an entire RC, right? You'll need to understand the implications of it. If you leave an entire RC, I'm not saying that strategy doesn't work in some cases. What I'm saying is, if you leave an entire RC, you get 4 questions continuously wrong. That's a whammy on your test, right? And if you leave an entire RC, that means on the critical reasoning and the sentence correction sections, you should at least have a 90th percentile score or an 85th percentile score to get a V35, because your RC is now going to drop to a 60th or the 50th percentiles. Got it? So you'll need to understand that leaving an RC is one thing, but that you have to compensate for that by improving your SC and your CR scores. You should do both, Surbi. So you focus on mocks and you should focus on revision. Got it? So Rupam, Rupam, again, just coming back to your point, if you see that your accuracy rate on sentence correction is really high and CR is really high, right? Then you maybe can take up that risk. But my personal advice to you, right? You can take this up or not. Don't leave the entire RC. Work with the RC, but work with the easy questions. What are the easy questions on RC? The easy questions would be the main purpose and the anchor phrase ones. Those don't take too much of time once you're able to, map the passage very well. What questions take more time are the inference ones. So maybe the inference ones are the ones you can let go if you feel that you're losing out on the RCs. Okay. See, Surbi, any last minute tips for quant improvement? I just told you, right? It's you taking up time practice sets, you reviewing the questions, you focusing on those problem areas, right? Because you need to understand, many students don't do this from beginning, right? They do it towards the end. But that error log that you maintain, right, from day one, that is very, very important, because you're not going to fall for very silly traps. And I gave you just two questions, right? Two questions which weren't in the 700 levels, in the mid 600 levels, and most of you all fell for that trap. The key is to learn from the mistakes, right? Not just make those mistakes. I'll look at the explanation and move on. Yeah, so you have two tests. I mean, somebody mentioned about the test breaks here. See, you have two breaks in between, okay? One after the quant section, one after the verbal section. Um, Guys, I mean, I'm not a person who will tell you go drink Red Bull and that is going to really, really be good and so on, right? I would just say it's better for you to get up from your seat, walk around, use the washroom, have a sip of water, maybe have an energy bar to eat, right? Just walk around, just be a little more, just loosen your limbs a little, and then just go back and sit down and take up the test. Okay, there's nothing, just don't do anything beyond that. Remember, guys, just be a little careful that during the break you cannot open your locker, cannot touch your mobile, you cannot, touch a book. You can't even carry your wallet inside, right? You don't have a watch also, you can't wear a watch inside. So don't go and open up the locker and then say I'm going to check on something, because you're just going to be debarred from the test then, right? So just make sure that just walk around, settle your nerves slightly before the next section, have a glass of water, use the washroom for sure, right? And then come back and just take up the test, right? So there's nothing more to do, because it's an 8-minute break. So you'll realize that that 8 minutes is going to just go in a jiffy. Every school considers the every school considers AWA and IR scores, Surbi. Every school. No, you cannot use a scratch pad during the break, Nitesh. If even before the test starts, if you write anything on the scratch pad, your score is going to be null and void. Debashish, economist, complete no. Please do not use anything that is not trustworthy, please. Okay, I say it's my personal view on that. That official tests are the most important, right? It's my personal view again that Veritas and Gmat are good. You can look up the reviews online. Okay, so I reserve my judgment on that, but I wouldn't be a person who uses economics. Simple as that. Nitesh, I didn't get your full question, right? Recently, scores have been cancelled. Okay, you're saying with respect to scratch pads during the break. Definitely yes. Okay, so you cannot do it. That's clearly written in the rules of before the printout that you take out. Just please read the rules and regulations before going in. It's clearly written there that you cannot write anything on the scratch pad before your test starts. You cannot write anything after. Okay, you can't even put ABCDE like what you do for all your verbal questions. You cannot do it before the time starts. Okay, guys, another 5 minutes. Quick questions. Should we do the advanced documents after finishing the OG? Definitely yes, Manu. I would recommend that after you finish the OG, take up a practice test, then work with the advanced documents. Right? Any other questions, guys? Last 5 minutes. Uh, Chetan, it's a very I mean, it's see, don't please don't look at the test as an Indian based test, right? It's not like the harder levels of questions will have only these topics. The easier levels of questions will have these topics. It's the same for quant and verbal, right? It's not like you're going to get bold-faced questions on the harder critical reasoning question. Bold-faced questions can come even at lower levels. Even a permutation combination question can come at lower levels on quant, right? So nobody knows. I mean, first of all, the number of questions you get from each topic will be different for different test takers, right? So there's no specific topic that comes at higher levels. There's no specific topic that comes at lower levels. The only thing you can say is the questions that come at a higher level will require a lot more reasoning than mathematics involved. Okay. So the math involved will be less, the reasoning involved will be a lot more, and it's going to be a little harder for you to comprehend the question because they'll make it a little harder in terms of a word problem. Yes, you'll have to increase your reading speed, right? I think it's not about the reading speed. I would say you have to work on. It's about how efficiently you read the RC, and how you hold on to what are the important points that you need, and how you let go what are the what are the points you don't need. Okay, you need to know what to let go and what to actually read. Okay, so once you get that fine line right of what to let go and what to read, you'll understand how things work. So what I mean to by that is this, right? Whenever you see a transition word like however, therefore, subsequently, right? Things like that, right? Those are points that you'll have to read and you'll have to jot down in your map of the entire RC. But things like specific pieces of information, right, which actually describes something, I would not spend too much of time actually writing the description in my map because I know I can always come back to that point of the passage and refer to it. Anjali, SC concepts. I mean, our videos I think are pretty much exhaustive, right? You can use the crackable guide for that. You can also maybe if you want use the Manhattan Gmat SC guide, that is also pretty good. Good structured. I mean, you'll find approximately the same content in that book and our examples. The only difference you'll find is we use more Indianized examples because we cater to the non-native test takers, and they will use more US based examples, right? How many continuous string of errors is safe? Nothing more than three, Santosh. Okay, two or three is all right. Anything more than two or three is a problem. How is the quality of GMAT Club? I think GMAT Club is a very good resource for quant. I have my doubts on the verbal bits, okay, because the verbal questions on the GMAT, right, and this is why we endorse official questions are more, what do you say, are more intricate. Let me put it that way. Are more intricate than what you get from any other test, right? There's a lot more things that you can take away from that question than any other question. All the other questions will test you on one particular concept and so on, but a GMAT based question, right, will give you a lot of take back. So that's why we recommend official questions only for verbal. Your score at the 96th percentile will be say a 45 or a 46. Okay, Ankur, 45, 46 means you've answered what, two questions wrong, I guess, two to three questions wrong. I think Gaurav, you can always go through the our YouTube channel for all the old webinars, or you can directly send maybe an email to our marketing team at marketing at crackverbal for an old webinar where we actually deal with topic specific webinars. Okay. So, for example, I've taken a lot of webinars on inequalities, absolute values. I've taken for permutations, combinations, data sufficiency. You'll also find maybe Arun, some of the faculty has taken webinars on inference-based questions on CR, on bold-faced questions, on modifiers on SC, and so on, right? So you can always find those things there. You can always go through one of the previously recorded webinars to get things, in place. Chandan, Chandan, I've already, addressed that. It's not a good sign to skip an RC. Okay. I mean, you can only, take that risk of skipping an RC if you're 100% sure that you're getting almost 85% of your SC and your CR questions right. Okay, because it's 4 questions that you're letting go. Ideally, 4 questions mean 4 errors continuously, going to impact your score, and your SC and CR should be at a higher level if you're, just ignoring one entire RC. Okay, guys. Last 2 minutes, last questions that I can cater to, and then we'll wrap up the session. I actually had a couple of more questions that I wanted to deal with in terms of, quant, but I think that's not the purpose of the session anyway. It's more to do with what questions you have and what doubts you have for me to resolve. Okay, so any last questions, guys, before we log off? Okay, so it's fine. So for most of you all, I'm guessing for most of you all logged in today, you'll have your exam in a month, or lesser than that. My advice is just take on board what I told you in terms of taking up the practice sets, reviewing the questions better, knowing what resources to use, knowing what practice tests to take, how to use your practice tests, how to analyze your practice. Just take on board what I told you, right? I think you should be okay to get whatever score you're looking at. See, one thing is you need to understand, and this is something, the faster you get your head around this, the better. Not everybody is going to score, a 740 or a 730 or 750. Everybody would have their, their plateaus at certain points, right? So it's not the end of the day if you end up getting a 700, or it's not at the end of the day if you get a 690 or a 680, right? Because your score is always the first point of entry. Yes, the score determines, whether you're going to be, accepted or not, but you can always make up with a really, really, really good application, right? And if your profile is really, really good, then that taken into consideration with your score and your application is what gets you through. Okay, so don't put too much of emphasis, on that score, and don't get too disappointed if if you're looking at a 750 and you get to a 730. Okay, my advice rule of thumb is always this: never retake the test if you're looking at a 20-point increase. Okay, if you're looking at more than that, then I would think you retake it. Work with what you have. If your score that you've got is approximately in that deviation of plus 20 or minus, plus 20 will not, it doesn't make sense. If your deviation of minus 20, minus 30 points, it's better to work on the application process. Yes, webinar on essays available on YouTube, Gaurav. Okay, we've also have a webinar with people from ISB and different schools also who come in and have guest interviewed with us, so you can have a look at that. Okay, perfect. All right, guys. So I'm logging off now. You can still keep in touch with me. You can always send in an email to prep@crackverbal. Just address it to Aditya, and I'll do my best to try to respond to all of your emails. Right. You can also give us a call on the prep numbers. I'm sure all of you would have the prep numbers on your handouts or in your study plan or in your emails. So please, you can contact us also in case you require some specific help. Okay. So good night. Take care. All the best for your exams. Keep us updated. Keep us posted on how your test went. Good night.